Emily Carter's mother died one afternoon in late October, when her car careened off a leaf-covered hillside and slammed into an old maple tree on the edge of a Vermont forest. There were no witnesses. No one really knew what happened. Only that the police report said that the brakes appeared to have failed, and that there was no sign of braking before the impact. The news reached Emily in the middle of the night from her closest neighbor, Doris, who lived across the street from them by a picket fence and 4 lavender bushes. When Emily got the news, she was in Boston, sharing an apartment with 2 college friends. She had graduated with a degree in English less than 3 months earlier, and was still struggling to find a full-time job. Her writing career consisted of a few short stories published in online magazines. The death of her mother, the woman who had been the center of her entire childhood, was like a punch in the gut, leaving her too stunned to shed a tear. A week after the funeral, Emily returned to the house where she had grown up, in the small town of Haley's Ridge. Nestled between woods and lakes, the Carter family's 2-story wooden house stood alone on a large plot of land, facing a gravel road in front, an old garden with a rotting white picket fence in the back, and a grove of pine trees rustling in the wind in the distance. Her father, Thomas Carter, had lived alone since his mother's death. Once a strict high school teacher, he barely left the house, living on his pension and silence. Emily had originally planned to stay for a week to help him sort out his paperwork. But the more she saw him sitting quietly at dinner alone, his figure thin and his eyes dark, the more reluctant she became. "Stay a few more days," he said, his voice as light as the morning dew. "This house is too quiet with just one person." Emily nodded, not thinking twice. Her old bedroom was still mostly intact. The faded band posters were still on the walls. The bookshelves were covered in a thin layer of dust, but the books were still there. To Kill a Mockingbird, Franny and Zoe, and the teenage diary tucked under the pillow. The bed was small, the mattress sagged in the middle, but the smell of old wood and the familiar light from the windows gave it a strange feeling, as if time had stopped in this house. She spent the first few days cleaning the house, burning scented candles, washing the sheets, and replanting flowers in the backyard. Mr. Thomas didn't talk much, but his eyes were softer than before. He would often look at Emily for long periods of time, as if trying to remember something from long ago. "You're like your mother in that way," he said one evening, as they drank tea on the porch. "Quiet most of the time, but always with those eyes." Emily smiled softly. She didn't know if it was a compliment or a growing obsession. Time passed quietly at Haley's Ridge. Emily began to write again, a few diary entries, a half-finished short story, and a sudden idea, to tell her own experience of loss and return. Every morning she woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the attic window, made breakfast for 2, read, or helped Mr. Thomas clean out the old garage. But there were things she gradually realized that were not easy to explain. Like Mr. Thomas keeping her mother's bedroom the same, not allowing anything to change. Like how every night he would turn on the record player, play her mother's favorite instrumental song over and over again, and then sit in the dark for hours. Once, when Emily had folded the laundry, he said, "That purple coat, your mother's. If you wear it, she won't be angry." Emily didn't answer. She looked at the shirt hanging on the porch, the thin silk, once her mother's, now fluttering in the wind like a ghost. She began to lose sleep, not because of fear, but because of an unnamed feeling of suffocation. The house was no longer a home, but a memory box, a place where everything reminded her, floating between life and death. One night, she opened the old wooden box her mother used to keep letters. Inside were handwritten letters, brief, about her feelings, about her worries, and about the husband she once trusted completely, but who, after that, seemed to no longer exist. One sentence sent a chill down her spine. "He looked at me like I was someone else, like I wasn't myself anymore." Emily folded the letter. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the window. Inside, the silent music still played steadily from the living room, her mother's music. Emily woke up late one morning, with sunlight filtering through the old lace curtains in her bedroom. There was no music from the living room, no smell of coffee as usual. There was no sign that Mr. Thomas was awake. The silence, strangely enough, made her feel uneasy. She went downstairs, calling softly, "Dad?" But there was no answer. The kitchen was clean, but cold. The coffee pot was still full, unplugged. When she found him in the living room, he was sitting motionless in an armchair, holding an old photo frame of his mother. The light fell on his face in a strange way, sharp and creepy. Emily went over and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "I kept calling. Didn't you hear?" Thomas was startled, as if he had just woken up from a dream. He shook his head, put the photo frame on the table, and said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he said softly, "I can still hear. I just don't want to answer." In the days that followed, Emily began to notice details that she had previously dismissed as signs of sadness. Mr. Thomas was no longer as quiet as he had been at first. At times he was strangely animated, walking around the garden, dusting off old furniture, telling old stories she had never heard. But then he would sit still for hours, staring out the window, unblinking. Once, while she was cleaning out the bookcase in his study, Emily discovered a small mahogany box, tucked behind a row of philosophy books. Inside was a series of old Polaroids, mostly of her mother from the 1990s, wearing floral dresses. Standing in the kitchen, sitting on the porch, looking out into the garden. But strangely, the last few were no longer of her mother, but of Emily herself. Photos of her in the kitchen, washing dishes, photos of her on the porch, reading, photos of her in the garden, bent over weeding. The photos were taken from a distance, from hidden angles, as if someone had been watching without her knowing. Her heart clenched. She put the box back, her hands shaking slightly. Maybe he wanted to record the memory. She reassured herself, but something inside her began to crack, a vague but powerful intuition. He was looking at her, not as a father would look at his daughter. That evening, Mr. Thomas invited her to dinner as usual. She made creamy pasta, the dish her mother used to make. As Emily set the plates on the table, he looked at her for a long time and then asked abruptly, "Have you ever thought, if your mother were alive, what would she do differently?" She paused, the spoon in her hand hovering in midair. The question was not unusual, but the way he asked it, a whisper, as if imagining something too far away, made her breathless. "I think she'll continue growing flowers, and maybe take a trip for herself," Emily replied cautiously. Thomas nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Sometimes I think, she's not going anywhere. She's still here, in this house, right where you're sitting." Emily didn't answer right away. She felt as if Mr. Thomas was testing her, or her own memory. The air around her seemed to thicken, and the light on the dining table, the warm, pale yellow light, was now dim and cold. She gently put her spoon down on her plate, trying to keep her voice calm. "Dad, Mom's gone. We both know that." Thomas didn't blink. He smiled slightly, a smile that wasn't clear if it was affectionate or disturbing, and took a sip of red wine. "You're right," he said, "but do you know that feeling sometimes? That feeling, like the person you lost is still there, right behind you, or in the corner?" Emily didn't know how to respond. It was true that there were evenings when she thought she could hear her mother's slippers clicking in the hallway. But she knew it was nostalgia. It was the human mind weaving illusions when it was pushed to its limits. And here, she wasn't sure what she was witnessing was pure pain. A few days later, when Mr. Thomas took his usual morning walk, Emily decided to clean her mother's room, the room he hadn't let anyone in since the funeral. She had to use the old key she'd found in the drawer of her dressing table. The room was almost untouched by time. The cream sheets were still clean. The purple robe hung at the foot of the bed, and the familiar scent of lavender still lingered in the air. But what stopped her was something on the dressing table, an old comb, a few tubes of lipstick, and an eyeliner brush lying askew. On the mirror, someone's finger had written a line that was blurred by the steam from the hot tea she'd brought in and covered the glass. Emily. She shivered. This was her mother's room. Her mother had never written her daughter's name on a mirror like that. Someone had been in here. Someone had left a mark, or had meant for Emily to see it. That evening, Mr. Thomas called her to the old piano in the living room. It was the one her mother had played on winter nights. After a storm, Emily sat down, running her fingers lightly over the white keys. A faint melody emerged from memory. He stood behind her, silent, saying nothing. She felt his breath on the back of her neck, closer than it should have been. Suddenly, he spoke. She sat in your exact spot, wearing the exact dress you're wearing today. Emily stiffened. She was wearing a pale purple floral dress. Her mother had one almost identical. You look just like her. Emily, he whispered, from the way you laugh to the way you tilt your head when you think. She stood up, interrupting the song. I'm tired. I think I'll go to bed first. Thomas didn't stop her, but when Emily turned, she saw him put his hands on the keys, gently playing the melody she had left off, as if he knew it all along. As if he were resurrecting someone who had died through each note, and through her. One afternoon, the sky had turned ashen gray as lead, and Emily sat alone in her father's old study. She told him she needed space to write, a perfect excuse to be alone without arousing suspicion. The door closed behind her like a promise of secrecy. Mr. Thomas's desk was surprisingly tidy. Psychology books, notebooks, and an antique typewriter sat in the middle as a display case. But what caught Emily's eye was the drawer beneath, the one that had always been locked when she was a child. It was unlocked now. Inside were a file, several leather notebooks, and a small black iron box with a lock, but long since broken. She opened the lid. What was inside took her breath away, a cassette tape, an old magnetic tape. Labeled with black marker, handwritten notes. A. September 2017. B. Trip to Mirror Lake. C. After the last argument. D. Unopened mailbox. She felt goosebumps rise down her spine. It was a tape. Whose? Her father? Her mother? Underneath was an old tape player, a portable Sony, with coiled headphones. Emily plugged in the headphones, her hand shaking slightly as she pressed the play button. An initial crackle, then a voice, tired, deep, cracked. If anyone is listening to this, I'm probably not here anymore. I probably decided to leave. Or I'm running out of time. It was her mother. There was no mistaking it. Thomas is no longer the man I knew. He controls everything I do. The clothes I wear, the people I call. What started as love, then became captivity. I think he wanted me to be someone else. A model, a memory to hold, not to leave. Emily stopped the tape. She leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. Her mother had not died peacefully. She had tried to speak, tried to leave clues, but no one had heard. She continued listening to the B tape, the recording from the trip to Mirror Lake. The place her mother had said was the only place she still felt free. Her voice softened, almost to herself. If my daughter found this, Emily, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I tried to protect you from this darkness. But if you're listening, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it's wrong. Don't wait like I did. Emily's eyes filled with tears. There was no doubt. Her mother had left signs, like broken threads in the dark woods. And now, she was following them. Emily entered her mother's bedroom, her heart still racing. The late afternoon light from the west window made long, thin streaks across the wooden floor. She closed the door. Not just for privacy this time, but to distance herself from all the sounds outside. She began to rummage through, not in a rummaging way, but as if she were searching through her memories. Each drawer she opened was a piece of the woman she thought she knew. The second nightstand contained small items, needles and thread, scented candles, a tin box of old letters. But the most striking thing lay beneath, a leather-bound notebook. Frayed at the edges, held together with a thin, worn rubber band. Emily opened to the first page. Her mother's familiar handwriting, a slight, steady slant. February 14th, Valentine's Day. Thomas brought flowers, but didn't meet my eyes the entire time at dinner. I feel like I'm eating with a stranger. Next page. May 3rd. He started asking me over and over who I'd called, where I'd been, what I'd said to Doris. I told him the truth, but he didn't believe me. Whenever we argued, he'd slam the door, play old music, and not let me out of the house. The more she turned, the denser the page became, as if she were writing to keep from falling apart. As Emily got older, he became different. I caught a look at her once, not a fatherly look. I felt a chill, but I didn't dare say it. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe, but what if it wasn't? Emily paused. Her finger trembled over the words. I'm planning on leaving. Doris said she'd help, but if he finds out. A pencil mark ran across the rest of the page. There was no page after that, as if she'd had to stop suddenly, or had no chance to continue. Emily closed the book and put it back, but she couldn't help the pang in her chest. Her mother had lived in fear, had known something was wrong with her husband, and feared for her daughter. She stood up and walked to the mirror. The image reflected in the large mirror wasn't just her own. It was a blurry copy of the woman who had stood there 2 decades earlier. A small noise came from downstairs, the front door opening and closing. Her father was home. Emily hurried out of the room, carrying the leather-bound notebook in her coat pocket. There was no doubt now. She needed confirmation, and if her mother was right, time was running out. Emily went into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She hid the notebook in the lining of her coat hanging behind the door. Trying to sound casual as she asked, "Do you want me to reheat the soup from yesterday?" Thomas put the paper bag on the table, his eyes scanning her as if he were examining her. "No need," he said. "I brought apple tarts from the market. The kind your mother likes." The words were as light as a breeze. But Emily's heart clenched. The kind her mother liked. Not the kind she liked. "Can I make tea?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and sat down in his chair, his hand gently caressing the table as if he were recalling something far away. While the water boiled, Emily watched her father. He was silent, but his eyes were moving constantly, as if he were struggling with an image inside his head. After a moment, he spoke suddenly. "Have you ever thought, if we could go back, change one little detail, things would be different?" Emily put the kettle down as gently as she could. "What do you mean?" Thomas looked up at her. His eyes were gentle, but there was something else behind them, dark, unreadable. "Maybe, if I hadn't upset Mom. If she hadn't left me." She didn't know if she was hearing remorse or excuses. "Do you ever regret anything?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I regret not keeping Mom. And now, I won't let that happen again." Emily took a half step back, a bell ringing in her head. "What do you mean?" Thomas stood up. He walked slowly toward her. Not threatening, but that look was no longer clear to whom. "You know, Emily," he said, "you make me feel as if time had never passed. You sitting at the table, playing the piano, walking in the garden, you're a living memory. A continuation. A father who can still love without losing." Emily felt her skin prickle. "What are you talking about?" She tried to keep her voice steady. He reached out as if to touch her cheek, but she stepped back. He paused, his arm hovering in midair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Maybe I let the pain guide me. But you know, when you lose half your soul, you have to find it somewhere." Emily didn't answer. She turned away, trying not to tremble. She understood. He could no longer distinguish between reality and memory. And worse, he was pulling her into the role of surrogate mother. Unconsciously but dangerously. That night, when he was asleep, Emily took the notebook and the cassette tapes back, locking the door from the inside. She needed a plan. She needed to get out of this place before anything went too far. Emily woke in the middle of the night with an unusual cold. She opened her eyes, not sure where she was, until she saw the old wooden ceiling, the pale moonlight through the window, and a sound, a piano. Someone was playing Clair de Lune, the piece her mother had played on sleepless nights. The music came from downstairs. She looked at the clock, 2:37 a.m. Emily crept out of bed. She didn't turn on the lights, just carried a small flashlight, and walked as softly as a cat through the hallway. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the piano flowing like mist in the air. Both beautiful and eerie. When she reached the stairs, she saw Mr. Thomas sitting at the old piano, his back to her. He was wearing a dark dressing gown, not his. It was her mother's purple gown. Emily's breath caught. She stood still, not daring to move. The music ended. He placed his hands on the keys, not moving. Then he said, without turning, "Can't you sleep?" She was startled. His voice was as soft as a breath, but it was cold to the bone. I heard the music," Emily said, trying to keep her cool. "Yeah," he said, "I couldn't sleep. I thought, maybe she'd come home if she heard this. She loves it, you know." Emily walked down the steps slowly. Each step was a struggle, between the part of her that wanted to help her father and the part that wanted to run away. "You should go to bed," she said, It's very late. Thomas turned. His face was in shadow. But his eyes were bright, feverishly bright. You know, Emily, he said, I think we should talk. About the things you're hiding. Her heart was pounding. I don't understand. I went into her room. He interrupted. Read the book. Listened to the tape. Emily froze. She couldn't lie. He knew. I left it there for you to see. You need to understand what your mother went through. He continued, his voice deep as the water. To understand how much I lost. To understand why you had to stay. She took a step back. I can't, Dad. I have my life. You need to start over. Too. You don't need to start over. He said, stepping closer. I just need you. She raised a hand to stop him. You're making a mistake. I'm not your mother. Thomas paused, as if he'd been doused with cold water. Then he nodded, frighteningly gently. Yes, you're not, but you're what's left, the only part one can keep. And I won't let anyone take it away. Emily felt her palms sweat. She knew that if she didn't leave now, she might never get a second chance. Emily retreated from the living room like a shadow, taking steps back, her eyes never leaving Mr. Thomas. When her back hit the stair railing, he was still there, motionless, just watching. We'll talk again tomorrow morning, he said. You'll understand, when all this is over. You'll thank me. Emily didn't reply. She turned and walked quickly back to her room, her heart pounding. Once inside, she locked the door, pushing the desk across the room. It was an instinct. She opened a drawer, pulled out her phone. No signal. She unplugged the charger, ran to the window. No Wi-Fi signal. No signal. She turned on airplane mode, turned it off, turned it back on. No change. She checked her coat pockets, the cassette tape box, her mother's notebook, the car keys. She needed to leave. Tonight. Emily bent over the bed, took out her old backpack, and stuffed it with the essentials, her wallet, a few personal items, a box of tapes, and a small fruit knife from her desk drawer. Not sure how much use it would be, but at least it was something to hold. The clock read 3:12 a.m. She opened the window, looked down at the low porch. If she climbed over, she could get down the gutter and onto the back lawn. She had just climbed onto the sill when she heard footsteps. Not footsteps on the floor, a creaking sound. Someone had opened a cupboard door downstairs. Then the hallway light turned on. Footsteps on the stairs. Emily ducked, her heart pounding in her chest. She held her breath, her ear pressed to the wood floor. A low voice sounded from outside the door. Are you asleep? She didn't answer. A beat of silence. Then a knock, soft but firm. Emily, open the door. I want to show you something. Just a minute. She didn't move. After a few seconds, the footsteps faded. The hallway light went out. She waited another 10 minutes. Her ear still pressed to the floor. No sound. She decided not to hesitate. Climbing through the window, she slid down the eave with both hands, trying not to make a sound. Her feet landed on the shingles, and she slid step by step to the gutter. The cold wind whipped at her skin, carrying the scent of damp woods and ashes from the night. Suddenly, a small click sounded from the side of the house. She bent down. The garage light turned on. Someone was there, or had been waiting. Emily froze. She pulled the small knife from her pocket, her hand shaking. Could she go back? No, she couldn't. Either through the yard and the woods, or confront. She chose the third, concealment. She slid down the lawn, crawled through the ferns that grew along the fence, and stopped behind the old wooden co-op where her father had kept chickens when she was a child. From there, she could see the garage. A figure passed through the small glass window, tall, thin, with a coat over his shoulders. Mr. Thomas. He held something in his hand, steel glinting in the neon light. Emily hid behind the barn, the wind whistling through the boards like a whisper from the dark woods. Her hand tightened on the small knife, not to attack, but to remind herself that she was still in control. Inside the garage, Mr. Thomas was busy at the tool table. After a moment, he emerged, slowly, as if nothing had happened. In his hand was a rope. Emily gasped. She dared not imagine what he was up to. There was no doubt, he had a plan. Maybe not tonight, but soon. She knew she had to get off the property. The main road was too dangerous. There was only the back path, through the woods, to the wasteland where the locals sometimes parked their cars for a hike. Emily crept along the fence, past brambles and low trees. Every snapping branch beneath her feet seemed to double in the silence of the night. But she kept going. The darkness seemed to swallow her. But she kept going. She had just reached the edge of the woods when she heard a voice calling, echoing from the house. Emily. Mr. Thomas's voice, low and drawn out. You don't have to be afraid. I'm not angry. I just want to keep you. To love you. To start over. Emily held her breath. She didn't turn around. Almost an hour later, she was in the wasteland. No cars. No people. She made her way to the larger trail, to town. If she was lucky, someone would pass by. She was about to use her flashlight when the headlights from afar swept over her. A pickup truck was coming. She ran into the middle of the road, waving like a madman. The truck braked. The man in it, an old farmer, got out. Panicked. Are you okay? Where the hell did you come from? Please, Emily gasped. Take me to the police station. Now. 3:30 in the morning. The Haley's Ridge police station was quiet, except for the night shift. When Emily walked in, her face was white. Her clothes were caked with mud and grass. Her eyes were wide and tired. She handed over the diary and the tape, and said only, "Your father needs help, but first, you need to get out of there." A few hours later, they found Mr. Thomas in the house, sitting in an armchair, holding a framed picture of Emily's mother, his eyes vacant. Beside him was the still playing guitar. He didn't resist. He said only one thing when the police arrived. "She's gone, like her mother." Boston in November was a cold, rainy day. Emily sat in her old friend's apartment, now her temporary shelter, wrapped in a wool blanket and staring out the window. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the night she left Haley's Ridge. But in her mind, the night had not ended. The sound of the piano sometimes echoed in her dreams. Sometimes she woke up and thought she was still standing in front of the garage, a small knife in her hand, her heart pounding like a war drum. But then the city lights, the honking of cars, and the smell of morning coffee helped her figure it out. She was out. Thomas Carter was in a suburban psychiatric facility. The police did not pursue charges. The hospital report listed higher cognitive impairment related to trauma and loss. They said he needed long-term care. Emily did not object. She asked for only one thing: to be kept at a distance. "I won't cut it off," she told the inspector at the end of the interrogation. "But I can't go in there. Not now." Every day, Emily wrote a little, not because she wanted to be a writer anymore, but because she couldn't breathe without writing. The first tangled lines: "I am a surviving memory. I am a forgotten witness. I have walked out of the house that time has forgotten, carrying with me sounds that no one dares to name." From the fragmented short paragraphs, she gradually formed a structure, a story half true, half fictional, about a girl who returns to her old house and finds not only the ghost of her dead mother, but also a father who is falling apart between the past and illusion. She didn't name the character Emily, but anyone who read it knew it was her. One afternoon, she received a handwritten letter, the handwriting shaky but clear. "I'm sorry for confusing love with possession, for letting the past consume you. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I just want you to be free. Thomas." Emily held the letter for a long time. He must have written it under the guidance of a therapist. But every word was true. And the truth, even when it hurts, is part of healing. In the small apartment, the late afternoon sunlight fell on the table where she was writing the final chapter of the story. A small spot of peace glimmered between the cracks. She took a deep breath. Then she continued writing. One Sunday morning, Emily decided to go to Green Maple Cemetery, where her mother was buried. She brought a bouquet of purple aster flowers, her mother's favorite, and her handwritten novel, now nearly 300 pages long. Her mother's grave was under a red maple tree, its leaves falling like bloody rain. There was no one else around. She sat down on the dewy grass, placed the flowers on the marble slab, and gently placed the book beside it. "I wrote it, Mother," she whispered, not to accuse, but to understand. She didn't cry, but the cold wind blew through, stinging the bridge of her nose. Emily continued to see her therapist every week after that, not because she felt weak, but because she knew Healing doesn't happen in silence. During one conversation, the doctor asked her, "If you could say just one thing to yourself the night you ran away, what would it be?" Emily thought for a long time, then replied, "Running is an act of love, if what you're running away from is what's killing you." She still wrote to Mr. Thomas from time to time, short, neutral, polite, unsentimental letters. She didn't send pictures, didn't tell stories about her personal life. But she did write back. Part of her couldn't turn away completely. But the other part, the part that had grown up, that had survived, learned to set clear boundaries. Not out of hatred, out of survival. On the first snow of the season, her novel was accepted by an independent publisher. The editor calls it a haunting, delicate, and deeply human story about what happens after loss, and when the past tries to live again in the present. Emily doesn't celebrate. She just lights a candle, puts on Clair de Lune, and writes in a new notebook. "I am no longer a living memory. I am a rewriter." The story ends not with a bang, but with a long, deep, true breath. There is no punishment, no happy ending. There is only choice. The choice to leave the old house. The choice not to rehash a broken past. The choice to love herself enough to say, no. And the choice to believe that one day, when she looks back, she will not only remember what she lost, but also cherish what she has found in herself. This story is not just a fictional journey, but also an echo of very real things: loss, the line between love and hurt, and the journey of self-healing that each of us will have to go through, in our own way. If there is a moment that makes you shiver, feel pain, feel empathy, I believe Emily is not just a character on the page. She has lived through your own emotions. And if you have ever felt stuck between memory and present, between duty and freedom, hopefully The Quiet House has given you a little courage to choose yourself. I look forward to seeing you again, in the next story. It could be a new journey, another darkness, or just enough light to keep us going. But whatever it is, I will be there, waiting for you. See you in the next story. Team Daily Unexpected Stories.